In the last tutorial, we took a look at the voices and what you can do to modulate the sample select. And here we've got the modulation section. This is where each voice passes on to be modulated. We could do like ring modulation or amplitude modulation. Let's take a look at what we can do here. So I'll start my sequencer, and right now the voice is muted, so we're not hearing anything. If we set it to bypass, it's bypassing this stage altogether. Here we can do some AM with modulation oscillator 1. Here we can do AM with modulation oscillator 2. Here we can do amplitude modulation with sample 1. Since this is voice 1 running into mod 1, you're applying amplitude modulation to the sample with the same sample. Here you're using the sample from voice 2 to amplitude modulate sample 1. Let's go ahead and set it to bypass. There, our sample's unaffected, and we could select a different sample. That's just going to play the sample as it's recorded. Let's go ahead and look at amplitude modulation of this voice with modulation oscillator 1. So here we're going to need to go to oscillator 1, and we can see we're at 0.1 hertz. So we're going to speed that up a little bit. And as you speed it up, you hear how the sound's becoming tighter and tighter until it starts to reappear again. And we get into the audio range. So our modulation oscillators cover a very wide range. I'm going to go ahead and set this to about 1 hertz. 1 hertz equals 1 second. What that means is when we go here and look at our phase, it should take us 1 second to complete an entire phase of this waveform here. Now we can see phase sync is on, which means every time we get a trigger input signal, our waveform is going to start at this point defined by the vertical line. And we can move that vertical line. I just happen to set it right here, so that way we'll have a nice decay type envelope. Let's go ahead and adjust that phase. Here the sound's getting quieter. Here it's coming back until it's loud again. So we could use amplitude modulation in that way. Let's go ahead and go to our mod 1 section. AM with oscillator 2 would give us the same functions. We just have 2 oscillators to work with. Let's amplitude modulate that sample with itself. Now that versus that just adds a little bit of fuzz. It's kind of rectifying and expanding the sound at the same time. You can hear it more like on kick drums. So in a way, it's a little bit of a tone shaper there. Now let's go ahead and apply amplitude modulation with sample 2. So here we've got our clap, and here we're selecting different samples to play for voice 2. That one kind of brightens it up. That adds a little bit more snap to the beginning. So you just have to play around with different combinations of samples. Right now, both of these are playing 909 samples. You might find it more interesting to go up into the excess range, where we've got a lot more kind of sound effect analog sounds. Sometimes it's great to modulate a traditional sample with something more like an analog effect. Let's go ahead and try the ring modulation. We're going to ring modulate this sound. Let's go ahead and select one of the hi-hats. And now let's use voice 1. We're going to use this waveform. Actually, we're going to select a different waveform. We're going to use the rounded square wave. And now as we adjust the frequency, I'm going to slow down the sequencer here so we can hear the full length of that sample. So we can use ring modulation to re-pitch the sound without changing the length of that sample. Sometimes a true square wave will add some harmonics in a hi-hat type sound. Other times you might want to use just a regular old sine wave. And let's go ahead and select a different sample. Let's go ahead and adjust the frequency here. So that's pretty cool. And there's a lot of things we could be doing here. We could be modulating this oscillator frequency. We could be modulating the phase, all sorts of stuff. Let's go ahead and try that. Let's turn the phase off. We're going to set our frequency pretty low here. And I'm going to speed up tempo here. Now notice that since we're in a low frequency range and using ring modulation, we're kind of playing with the phase. That rim shot's happening every hit. And since it is, sync is off, so it's kind of free running right now. Let's go ahead and turn sync on. We can change the pitch by doing this, or we could change the tone by moving our phase point. Now we're going to try ring modulating sample 1 with itself. Now that's adding quite a bit of new tone to our sample compared to, let's say, turn it off and listen to that same sample. So that's a great way to come up with new tone variations. But now let's ring modulate voice 1 with voice 2. So here, so this knob is selecting our sample for voice 2. And all these become new tone variations. So you've got every instrument you select here, now you have all these combinations of tone. You go to the next sound, you've got all these combinations of tone. Basically, it's the number of samples to the power of the number of samples. This is the combinations you're going to have here. Once we get past the ring modulation section, here we can define that instead of taking the sample from voice 1 and routing it into the mod 1 section, we can instead take the output from mod 2 and route it into our modulation 1 input. So we could set up ring modulation on one mod section, amplitude modulation on another, and now allow both processes to affect just a single voice. Also, we've got our gain setting here for each mod section. Here's the one for mod 1, here's the one for mod 2. The gain section does go up to 200. That'll be 2 times as loud. And as we decrease it down to 0, we won't hear any signal. So as we increase this, so now it's at 100. So you can use this gain setting to help compensate and get the level for both voices and mod sections to a nice balance within each other. Alright, I hope that gives you a good idea of some of the possibilities of the mod section. We just don't have enough time to sit here and try every single combination out, but that really is the key, is just to sit down, try out the different combinations. And some other things you might want to do is, let's say you're ring modulating. Let's say this sample for voice 1 is staying stationary. Go ahead and try ring modulating it with voice 2. You could assign something like an external CV now to animate the selection of the sample for voice 2. So instead of you doing this to change the tone, the external CV is going to do that for you. And that way, you're still going to be hearing this sound, but now tonal variations are going to happen due to this sample that's ring modulating with it changing on every step, or however often you like. You could also try randomizing the sample select for this voice 2 and primarily listen to this one. Or you can animate both of them to different degrees and just constantly be hearing a different tone every time. And when you get up in the higher presets like Are You Okay or Melodies, some of those are randomizing all of it like that. So every time it hits a drum sound, you're going to be hearing a new combination, and that's a great way just to kind of hear some of the possibilities that are available in the transient drum module.